because sometimes people come one morning with a theory of relativity.
Hello, hi, welcome. Hi, I'm Nikki. Hi, oh, I love that. I love that energy. Yay. And it's like the classroom. Everybody's in the back. I've never understood that. 20-some years in doing this. I've never understood it. Welcome, everyone. I am Nikki Caro. I am the interim dean of the graduate school, and it is my distinct pleasure to welcome all of you here to the University of Miami's 8th annual graduate and doctoral research symposium. This event is going to highlight the incredible research and innovation that is being led by our graduate students and our postdoctoral scholars, whose work will continue to drive discovery and impact across all of our disciplines. Today is an opportunity for us to showcase the groundbreaking ideas, to foster collaborations, and to celebrate the dedication of our emerging scholars. I certainly am excited to learn a new thing or two today. I encourage you to engage in meaningful discussions, exchange insights, and take full advantage of the expertise that is gathered here today. We have over 100 presentations in both our poster session, our oral presentations, and our TED-like talks, making this our largest research symposium to date. So in 8 years, thank you all for being here and being part of that. Thank you for your participation in our special event. Now I'm going to ask our Associate Dean, Suyeon On, to come up to the stage so she can introduce our keynote speaker.
So thank you, Nikki Kurol, and good afternoon, everybody. And it's my great pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Gauri Agarwal. Dr. Agarwal serves as the Associate Dean for Curriculum and Associate Professor of Medicine, Medical Education, Informatics, and Health Data Sciences at the University of Miami Miller School of Medicine. She is a passionate educator, an innovator, and a national leader in bringing together technology, the humanities, and medical education. Her recent work includes developing AI, everybody know AI, right? And virtual reality curricular, authoring national guides on medical humanities, publishing in the New England Journal of Medicine Artificial Intelligence Journal. What really stands out about her is her commitment to shaping learning that's both human-centered and forward-thinking, a perfect fit for today's conversation. Please join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Dr. Gauri Agarwal.
Definitely need a microphone. Can you hear me okay with that?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor, and I had a lot of fun putting this together because I was thinking about what to talk to you all about on this day when you're presenting all of your work and just starting your research journeys. And this came to my mind, was this term transdisciplinarity. And it's a little bit of a different term than maybe something you're used to. So if you think about people who are multidisciplinary, in the hospital, I'll give you a very concrete example. Sometimes multidisciplinary grounds is when you've got all these different experts in their fields, and they're all, thinking about a problem in their own unique way. Interdisciplinary, meaning that we have this problem, but we're working together on it. It's not you doing your thing and I'm doing my thing. We're working together on it. Transdisciplinary is when somebody is not only an expert in this one field, but they've also done a deep dive into this thing, and they find the connections and the links between these things and have incredible, beautiful results because of that. So the bottom line, the pearl for this entire talk, is how do you become transdisciplinary in your work? Because I really do think it has great benefits. So if you look at this particular painting, anyone ever seen this painting before? It's very famous by George Seurat. Has anyone actually been in front of it, the actual painting, at the Art Institute in Chicago? Has anyone ever been to the museum? Some of you have. And it is spectacular. This takes up a whole wall, and it emphasizes this particular technique by the painter George Seurat, which is pointillism. I learned that in 3rd grade, which is I had to create a little drawing in 3rd grade where I had to take multiple little dots of color and kind of put it together, and I made a little cat out of all of these different colors. This is a much more spectacular version of pointillism. And it is an incredibly scientific painting, though. It's very systematic, and I didn't know this about painting. I just sort of experienced it before when I was training in Chicago, and I stood in front of it. It was also made very famous, by the way, Ferris Bueller's Day Off, if you've ever seen that movie. And you can see, as you get closer and closer to the painting, thousands of these colored dots. And Georges Seurat apparently was very much influenced by a chemist, Marcel Chevreau, who was an expert in textile dyes. And he was also really influenced by this guy, Ogden Reed, who invented color theory. He was a physicist. And he was taking all of these scientific principles, learning about them, and then applying it to making this really beautiful painting, because he was learning that the way that he put different colored dots together would create different optical perception in the human eye and have different emotional impacts on the viewers. So it's really an incredibly scientific painting beyond just sort of being beautiful. So the idea today is to really talk about this whole concept of transdisciplinarity and people who are polymaths. If you've never heard that term, polymaths are people who describe this very thing, who are able to show this kind of expertise in multiple disciplines and learning from and about the linkages between these different disciplines. So I wanted to give you a couple of examples of Nobel laureates who are polymaths. And I also wanted to talk about how this has played a little bit into some of the research that we've done with our medical students and nursing students and physical therapy students here at the University of Miami, and some of the lessons, hopefully, that will help you in your own research. By the way, this particular drawing I also picked, this was from a woman, an artist. Her name is Maria Sabila Marian, and she was the first woman to travel in the name of science. She's a German woman, but she was in Amsterdam, and at that time, this is 1699, people thought insects basically came from rotting flesh or mud. There was not much understanding of where insects came from, where these beautiful butterflies come from. And she actually traveled to Suriname, and she made these beautiful portraits of metamorphosis, which are not only incredible illustrations, but also incredibly scientifically accurate, and is known to be an incredible entomologist and ecologist as well. So being transdisciplinary. Okay, so there was this wonderful study that I found. This was in about 2008, describing polymaths. As I mentioned, polymaths are these Nobel laureates who have expertise in these multiple disciplines. And I thought it was just incredible that Nobel laureates in science were 22 times as likely to be performing artists, to be singers or actors or dancers, or 7 times more likely to be artsy and craftsy, or 12 times more likely than the general person to be writing poetry, plays, or novels, or 2 times more likely to dabble in music and to be able to play an instrument. So clearly there are some other parts of the brain that are helping them be incredibly successful. And that led me into learning about some of these Nobel laureates that I'm going to talk to you about briefly today. So everyone familiar with the famous story of Alexander Fleming and how he discovered penicillin, right? In a very messy lab, and he left these petri dishes lying around, and he came back, he saw the mold growing, and the bacteria aren't growing near the mold. And rather than throwing it away, he had a eureka moment that there was something in that mold that was inhibiting the growth of these bacteria, and that eventually led to the discovery of penicillin, which has saved millions of lives, right? So that a lot of us have heard. What I didn't know was that he was a painter. He liked to paint in watercolors. So he developed this whole other field where he would actually take microbes and use this loupe and actually paint microbes on these petri dishes on the agar. And this was incredibly technically difficult because he would have to find the particular microbe that had the exact color that he was intending and have it grow at the exact rate that he needed it to grow in order to create, and these are actual paintings of his on these petri dishes. And as you can see, he starts to get better and better as he advances. And this has actually created this whole thing of microbial art, which I didn't even know existed. But this is a real thing. Every year there's an annual award given to the best microbial art. And people sell their work and all of this stuff. And he was somehow able to incorporate this discipline into his life and learn. And he eventually won the Nobel Prize in Medicine in 1945. We're very familiar, of course, with these two gentlemen who won the Nobel Prize, this is Richard Feynman, who won the 1965 Nobel Prize for his discoveries in quantum electrodynamics. I didn't know that he was an artist. I didn't know he was a very talented drummer and bongo player. And he often said that some of the nagging scientific problems that he was facing, he would often use sort of acoustic images that came to his head as he was playing music. He felt that the music allowed him to think through some of those problems. And Einstein, if you haven't heard this quote, said, "The theory of relativity occurred to me by intuition, and music is the driving force behind this intuition." So there's something about this transdisciplinarity, this diving into another discipline that's very separate from the scientific work you're doing. And this one was really interesting to me. So this is Herbert Simon. I wasn't that familiar with his work originally, although he was one of the original developers of some incredible AI tools. So he was a professor in several different departments at Carnegie Mellon, and he's made major contributions to AI and computer science and psychology, etc. But he was a piano player, and he dabbled in drawing and painting, but also very importantly, chess. And he learned a lot from chess that he applied to sort of the algorithms that he was developing at Carnegie Mellon as he was trying to create human-like decision-making in the lab. And I love this quote of his. He said, "I can rationalize any activity I engage in as simply another form of research on cognition." And he said, "I always view my hobbies, as part of my research." So I think part of the message there is to look at all the other brilliant things that you do that are outside of your research that can inspire you to be more creative and to think about things in a different way. And finally, this woman I wanted to bring up to you, so Christiane Misselman-Wohlhard. So she won the 1995 Nobel Prize in Physiology for her work in embryonic development. And I wanted to focus on the fact that she actually created cookbooks, and as a student, she tried everything. She tried physics, she tried chemistry, she tried biochemistry, all before she finally settled on embryology, which eventually got her the Nobel Prize, because she wanted to learn it all. She wanted to learn about all of these different disciplines, and in her life, she wanted to make sure that she lived a full, complete life, writing cookbooks. That's her cookbook that she did. And I love this particular quote from an interview that she gave. She said, "You know, I'm very curious. I like to understand things, not only science. I did music, I did language, and literature. Scientists are very ambitious. They work and work and work, and they go to the lab, and they write this, and they write that, and they run from conference to conference. And I sometimes wonder, when do they have time for a new idea?" And she said, "Creativity can only come on an empty mind. I take time off, I take long weekends, I stay home, I think, and I write, and I read. And I think this is really great fun." So not only is it good for the soul and for your well-being, but it also could inspire you with a new idea because you have that blank space rather than being busy and harried and doing the daily work. And I wanted to give you a very concrete example. So I'm talking about these really accomplished Nobel laureates, but we have so many examples of this, and immediately one of our medical students came to my mind. He's here today. I wanted him to tell you a little bit, but Brett Colbert is one of our MD PhD students, and when I met Brett early, it was actually because he was involved as a group of students who were developing a brand new curriculum at the medical school. And then we started working on something actually a little bit transdisciplinary. It was a project that we were working together on dual degrees. We were really curious as to why more and more medical students around the country were getting a second degree beyond their medical degree. An MBA, an MPH, PhDs, Masters in Genomics, whatever it is. And so we did this study where we did interviews from around the country to find the high volume places. By the way, we found out that the University of Miami is the #1 school in the country in terms of people graduating with a second degree. Almost half of our entire graduating class graduates with a second degree. But anyway, so Brett, what I didn't know about Brett, which he let me know in a Zoom call randomly, was that he had studied in seminary school and that he had studied the classics. And then a little bit later on, he mentioned that he was traveling to Italy with his wife and developing these art exhibits. And I started to ask, how are you able to manage that along with medical school? And I thought it would be good to hear from another student about how they're trying to be transdisciplinary and do this work and how it inspires them in their research. So Brad, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Dr. Agarwal. I think you all know that every good example needs a counterexample. That's why the Nobel laureates went first, and then I come after. so we've known each other for quite a while. She's been advising me throughout my career, and I'm so thankful for it, and thankful for the opportunity to speak today. And I think she asked me to because she realizes that I have all these various data points in my life, and that I needed to spend the time, sit down, and actually try to draw some lines through all of it. So thanks for that opportunity as well. But as she mentioned, my path is non-linear, for sure, as I think probably all of you will recognize in your own lives as well. I grew up here in Miami, and then I went away pretty young, and I spent 7 years in the Catholic seminary studying to be a priest, and that was a very big part of my life. And when I was there, we would play soccer. I was up in New England, and in the summer we'd play soccer every day. In the winter we'd play basketball every day, and then you would switch just based on the weather. And playing soccer, I realized that I could play the goalie and the forward and the defense and the midfield, but I was getting very, very frustrated because there was always somebody who was better than me at all those positions. And I just could, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't get better at any one of them, and I couldn't beat them out. But then I think the kind of key insight I had one day was that, but I was better than them at all the positions. They were really good at one, and I was really good, I was okay, let's say, at most of them, right? And I said, well, this, I think, then is my skill that I need to highlight. Rather than trying to hyper-focus and do one thing, I'm going to try to be the kind of person who is good at many things and probably the best at nothing, and that's okay with me. So from there on, I just have followed the opportunities as they come up. And really, it's not a testament to me and the work I do. It's more a testament to the situations that I've been and found myself in and the opportunities I've taken. So when I was in the seminary after high school, and for a while we were studying philosophy and humanities and theology and the classics. We learned Latin and Greek and history and art history, which becomes important later. But I got very sick with Lyme disease, which is a bacterial infection you get from a tick bite, which happens all the time in New England. If any of you are from there, you know. And that led me to have to spend time away for a while. I came back to Miami, spent time with my family, got better, decided I wanted to go back to the seminary, give it another try. So they sent me to Spain after that. But then during that time was really my first exposure to medicine in a meaningful way. And that's when I said, you know, all of these skills that I've gotten in the seminary, yes, many intellectual skills, many different things that I've learned, facts that I've memorized, Latin conjugations and declensions. But more importantly, I think what that taught me is really how to sit with somebody, how to be present with another human, because what is a good priest supposed to be except just a person that someone else can go to in their time of need and find comfort and solace from. And so I decided, well, that's exactly what a doctor should be as well. And so I was really curious about the intellectual side of medicine throughout my sickness. The only grade in high school, I'm going to brag a little bit, that I got a B in was in biology. So it wasn't my forte by any means. But during my sickness, I tried to read the scientific papers that we all can do right now very easily, but had no clue what I was reading, could not understand it at all, but tried. So I said that the intellectual side of medicine is stimulating, always learning, trying to find something new. But more importantly, the human side of medicine is important to me. So let me try to bring what I have to that field. Came back, did my undergrad at FIU, transitioned to the MD PhD program about 8 years ago, and have been going through it. And when I started the MD PhD, I knew that what is going to afford me above all is time. And time is your single most important asset. And as we saw in the previous slide, the quote from the Nobel laureate, that she said, when do people have time to think, to create a new idea? And what we have the opportunity during graduate school, after graduate school, is we always worry, I'm not executing, I'm not doing, I'm not accomplishing as much as the other person. And today's a day to celebrate our accomplishments when we present, but we can be overwhelmed by that feeling of always feeling behind. But what we really value and have to value is our time right now. And that time that we have in order to just fail, honestly. Fail as much as you can right now in a safe and protected environment, because that's how you're going to grow the intellectual capital that later you're going to have to spend. And so I just opened myself up to opportunities. I spent time in doing work with some startups in town, which led to me taking a year off after my graduate school to work in clinical trials. I met my wife during graduate school, which was awesome. At the medical campus, there's a parking garage, and then we have to walk across the street, but as you know from being in Miami, it's pouring rain. And she was new to Miami, so she didn't know to carry an umbrella with her, and I had an umbrella. So I just offered to walk her to her building one day, and that's how we met. So stay up, those serendipitous opportunities. And on our first date, we spoke about a sculpture that is by the artist Bernini, as one does on first dates. And we decided to go get married at that church in Rome. And so we just took the initiative, made it happen. Highly suggest it. It's actually a lot cheaper than trying to get married in the US, believe it or not. I can hook you up if you need to. But from that experience, we met a priest there who was then giving a space to an artist in the back of the convent. And that artist was from Iran. And he decided to come to Rome and study there because he wanted to learn how to do classical art so that he could express his culture's stories and history through the lens of classical art, which he wasn't allowed to study or learn in Iran. And so we were very touched by him. And we decided, Amir, whatever you need, we're going to help you with. If you need a little canvas, paint here and there, we'll help. And those were just the starting things that we helped him with. And then one day he said, I want to meet the American universities in Rome, but they won't answer my emails. Do you have any connections or thoughts of how to get in with them? Which truly I didn't at the time. But my wife and I were in a coffee shop and we had the idea, well, I bet they would answer an American art foundation. So we got on Google, and I said, Amir, if we had an art foundation, what would you call it? And he said, well, let's call it the pneuma, which is the Greek word for spirit or life. We get things like pneumonia from that. But because we want to breathe a new life into old techniques. So I said, that's great, brilliant. So Pneuma Art Foundation is what we called it. We got on Google, we bought the domain really quick. We made a Gmail that says @Pneuma Foundation. And we started sending all these emails to these schools just from a coffee shop and said, hello, I'm Dr. Brett Colbert, and I'm the director of the American nonprofit, the Pneuma Art Foundation. I'd really appreciate it if you met with our artist in residence in Rome, Amir. Please, schedule some time to meet with him. And of course, they all responded at that point. So we said, we were onto something. If we can set up this scaffold for artists to then stick to, they can do more and accomplish more as a collective rather than as an individual. And it's been very successful so far. We've had 2 exhibitions in Florence. The last one was at the Palazzo Vecchio with 15,000 visitors in 10 days with 40 artists. And it was a lot of work during medical school, as was mentioned. But I think just the take-home message from me from all of this is that it's just about the opportunities that present themselves. And if you put yourself in a place where you're going to have opportunity, which this university absolutely is, and the careers that you're choosing absolutely are, then these things will come. And it's up to you to say yes, and then just figure out how to do them after. But say yes first, and then you can figure it out. So just sharing a little bit of my time and thoughts. That's a great picture. It's actually taken at the courthouse the day we got married, but thanks for finding that one. But I appreciate your time.
I love that you took advantage of those serendipitous moments that you were describing, like Alexander Plumpkin, right? Just noticing something, not just throwing it away, but sort of deeply observing it, which takes us to the next point, which is that you just really have to live a life of curiosity. Don't just stay in your lane, learn about other disciplines. I found that to be very helpful throughout my career. I just put a list, I was kind of thinking through about all the different disciplines that I've worked with. I worked with artists, art historians, educators, engineers, physicians, nurses, physical therapists, virtual reality experts, psychologists, ethicists. I'm sure there's more of those. It was just what I could rattle off. And one of the things that I've always tried to see is what are the linkages between your work and mine? And how do we find some sort of linkage that could be really interesting? And a couple of years ago, my main job is as a curriculum dean, and I was thinking through what an AI curriculum could look like for medical students. And my background had been in the humanities and visual art training. And I was thinking, is there something here that art could teach them? And this is, I'm going to describe to you a little bit of that work in a minute. So there had not been that clear linkage between AI and what the humanities could teach us about AI. And I have found it really helpful to go to conferences outside of my field of interest. Actually, I came to a random VR conference here at university just because I was interested. I'd never put on a headset in my life. And I thought it was incredibly cool. I learned about this company called Body Swaps that led to a grant from Meta, and then a study that we did with medical and nursing students. So just go out there and learn about other things. And sometimes science requires unconventional approaches. So trying to think about what's a different angle, what's a different way of approaching this. So that brings me to some of the work that I wanted to describe to you. So several decades ago now, I was introduced by an art historian and educator to this strategy called visual thinking strategies. Anyone ever heard of it before? Some of you have. Yes. So VTS is used in even kindergarten, so K through 12. It's not a difficult thing to do, but the FBI and police also use it, and it's also been used in a decade of medical schools. And it's a very simple approach, seemingly simple, but very actually difficult to facilitate. All you have to do is get people in front of a piece of art, you have them look at it for about 30 seconds, and then you ask these 3 questions. What's going on? What do you see that makes you say that? And what more can you find? And those 3 questions, if you can believe it, took a lot of work from a lot of cognitive psychologists and museum educators to get it just right, and we're going to practice it just so you have a sense of what it's like. Okay, so just take 30 seconds to take a look at this particular painting. Okay, I'm going to ask anyone, if you're brave enough, there are no right or wrong answers. What do you think is going on here? Okay. Thank you.
It's just someone who's left behind and watching for some safety and watching a house for like somebody left.
So let me make sure I heard you right. You think that this woman is staring at this house and feels left behind? Are those the words you used?
Yeah.
Okay. What do you see that makes you say that she was left behind?
Maybe her body posture.
Okay.
Like
Okay, so you felt her body positioning made you feel like she was helpless. Is that right? Okay. And what do you see about her body position that makes you feel like she's helpless?
staring towards that side and like kind of comfortable, so but like staring.
So she looks like she's hiding to you, and because her back is to you and you can't see her face? Is that what makes you feel like she's left behind and helpless? Okay, thank you very much. So what more can we find?
Just to help out. I mean, just a lot of distance between her and the homes, which makes you feel a sentiment that, yeah, she was left behind, but also as if something has happened to her that she's unable, she's trying to go in that direction, but she's physically not able to do so.
So interesting. So you feel like there's a lot of space between her and the house, which gives you that sense of being left behind. And you said another word which I missed.
Physically, the way her body is turned almost gives me this feeling that she is physically unable to reach the home.
Okay, and you feel that her body position as well, you noted, and it makes you feel like she's physically not capable of reaching that house that we see in the distance. Thank you. What more can we find?
Yeah, to add to her point, right, she looks very malnourished. Her arms are emaciated. Her scalp, like her scalp looks like very sitting on the top. Even just not really looking too deep into it, but just looking at it, if you look at it very fast, the color looks undersaturated. Like it's very, it adds to the bleakness that everyone is like describing. And the only thing I guess like that's colorful is her dress.
Let me make sure I caught everything. So you felt like she looks malnourished, almost emaciated is the word you use. You feel like she might be having thinning hair because of the way her scalp looks. And you feel like there's a lack of color in the entire portrait, which also gives a sense of what? Of weakness. Okay, wonderful. Sorry? Obliqueness. Okay, fantastic. So we'll stop there. Thank you all for helping with that. What did we notice as we went through that exercise, as those three people who bravely spoke up their thoughts? Any impressions of just their observations?
It started off with like the whole picture, and then it started getting more detailed as each person went along.
Yeah, it's really interesting because usually we actually do this for about 15 minutes in front of a portrait with medical students or nursing students or physical therapy students. And the longer, we're not used to that, by the way, right? We go into museums and we just walk right by and maybe we spend a few seconds in front of one, but we very rarely sit for 15 minutes in front of a piece and absorb it, or in front of people, by the way, right? Where we're just giving them our undivided attention and making these kind of observations. And the longer you sit with something, the more you slowly look, the more you observe and pick up, which is incredibly important in medicine, but also in many different fields, which is why the FBI uses this type of training. So that you pick up all these really seemingly unimportant details and you start to create a narrative about what might be going on. The other incredible thing about this work, and a lot of evidence to support it, is that it also shakes up our cognitive biases. So maybe you weren't thinking anything along the lines of what you just heard from those three individuals, and you think, well, we're all staring at the same thing. Why is it that they're picking up emaciated and helpless and having difficulty, where I just see a woman lying, in the grass, having a good time? Whatever it is, it shakes up our perspective, which is also very important in medicine and life, that our worldview is not the singular view. So this actually happens to be, if you're not familiar, The Christina's World by Andrew Wyatt, and there's a lot of speculation that she might have had Charcot-Marie-Tooth disease, which is a neurologic condition which actually does cause the muscle atrophy that you were picking up. And this is what she would actually do. This was painted as an actual individual that was painted by Andrew Wyatt, and she would like to actually crawl to her home because she didn't want to use other equipment. So I always find visual art to be very illustrative for students to understand different concepts. If you're not familiar with this particular piece, it's called The Ambassadors by Hans Holbein. And if you look at it, it's just full of detail, and we could probably spend a lot of time dissecting all of it. But it was painted at a time of a lot of political intrigue. Henry VIII wanted to divorce his wife. That wasn't allowed by the Catholic Church, so he sent these ambassadors from France to try to negotiate things. But anyway, the whole point of this painting is not all of that. It's just this thing that's there at the bottom. Anyone ever actually seen this painting? And nobody really knows what that is when they're staring at it head on, because yes, the skull. So if you actually happen to see it and walk by the painting, the skull, it's this example of anamorphic art where you can see it from certain angles, right? And visually, you can see that from just one angle, which is also a really important lesson for medical students, because I will tell you that many times on rounds to the hospital, there is a person who's had a fever, and we're trying to figure out why they have a fever, and we find out that nobody has looked at the person's backside, and they have an ulcer that's infected, right? Because nobody's looked at them visually because they've just been lying in bed for so long. So it's very important for people to remember that 360-degree perspective. So we did a study where I thought, empirically, this looks really interesting and it's fun, but is it actually helping anybody, right? So we did a study where we actually took first-year medical students, we had a control group, and we exposed them to this type of training. And you're just seeing one, you can't read all of it, but you're seeing that after this type of training, the intervention group, they spent a lot more time with the work. They wrote a lot more deep observations and detailed observations. And most importantly, when we coded those observations, they were clinically relevant observations, important observations, right? And these were first-year students who really didn't know what the world looked like, but they were still picking up on things that were important. So that was an interesting study for me, and I said, there's something here, and that took me into this world of BTS. And this is just more evidence, just in case you're ever interested in diving into BTS for more. I mentioned the observation and the perspective changing, but also it's just we get to talk about the human condition and suffering and By the way, since art isn't black or white, it forces you to tolerate ambiguity. It forces you to not have a clear right answer, right, at the end, which is very much like medicine. And as I'm listening to you as facilitating, it's very hard actually to keep track of everything you're saying and paraphrasing it, so our students facilitate and they learn how to listen well and communicate well. So this particular piece actually was at our Low Art Museum with a bunch of our medical students, and I love it. If you happen to go to the Low, they have this another sculpture by Dustin Yellen, but it's really cool because when you look at it from a 3D perspective and you walk by it, you see nothing if you're looking at it from that side view, but you see this whole entire world in this humanoid type of creation, incredibly beautiful. As you go up closer and closer, you pick up so much more detail, and it reminded me of Crick and his famous drawing of DNA and how he had to kind of sketch it out, and this was the sketch. He famously went to a pub and said, I think I've discovered the secret of life. And it was this ability to kind of think about something from a 360-degree perspective. And then it brings me to this. So this is a Kehinde Wiley painting. It was hanging at our Low Art Museum, not really well known, so definitely not on ChatGPT. And because it was a private piece, and we had done this BTS exercise with a bunch of medical students, like we always did. And I was listening to them talk, and so much of what they were talking about, and this was, just around the time of the pandemic, and they were talking about, Kehinde Wiley's portraits are a lot about diversity and equity and inclusion and belonging, and it was hanging in our Renaissance portrait galleries. So these were some of the conversations they were having, because they're human, and they live in a very human world. And I said, it might be interesting to see how ChatGPT deals with this image if I put it through BTS. What does it respond with if I go through BTS? And so I just started asking it questions. What's going on? And so it started to give me, lots of answers. And at that point, it said, I think it's this person's making a peace sign. So then I said, what do you see that makes you say that's a peace sign? And then it gave me an explanation for that. I was able to critically think through that. Index and middle fingers are spread apart, and that's pretty commonly recognized. And then I said, what more can you find? And then I kept prompting and prompting and prompting, and it gave me a lot. As you can see, I did it for about half an hour, and with this whole word cloud of all of the things that it was bringing up. But not once at that point in time did it talk about any of those themes that the medical students were talking about. So to me, that was one of those aha moments where I said, it's missing something fundamentally human, right? It's missing something fundamentally about the human experience and the human thoughts and human judgment and human intuition in our human world. And so that's what led me to this intersection of AI and the humanities and what does it mean to be human anymore. And we created a module for our medical and nursing students where they learn, everything they need to learn about AI. So that was published, and it just takes them through a bunch of material. But more importantly, they do that pre-learning, and then they come in for a workshop where they experience, AI tools. They interrogate them. They talk with our faculty about the risks and benefits. They wear VR headsets. They're exposed to all this kind of technology, and then we do the BTS exercises, and then we ask them these questions at the end of it. Exactly the questions I was interested in, which is, what is human about you that's going to help you in the practice of healthcare? What is it that the AI tool could help you with, maybe be a better person and a better doctor? Here's just some images of them working through all of these things during that workshop. And they, of course, improved in their knowledge pre and post that interaction. But here's where I found interesting stuff. So when we asked them about, where could AI actually help you, they said all of the usual things, the kinds of things that maybe they didn't want to do, right? Like triaging and dictations and billing and all of that coding. And then when we said, what do you think only a human being could do to enhance the care of a patient? They started to talk about things like delivering the news of a death, right? That is something a human should only be doing, or end-of-life counseling, or even physical touch, or advocacy, or support. And then when I asked this final question, what do you think are your uniquely human skills that will not be replicated by AI? It was all of this. A lot about empathy, connection, critical thinking, judgment, analysis, etc. So I just thought this was a really important way for them to start their careers, thinking about how they are going to help enhance the future of healthcare and science and their uniquely human abilities, and that they're thinking about that constantly as they adopt new AI tools. And then this is just an example of how they can actually enhance their already good human skills in VR. I mentioned that grant from Body Swaps. This is a really cool tool where they can go in and talk to a patient. This was a particular patient who didn't want to have dialysis. And I was able to, talk to the patient, and at the end of it, because it's VR, he can give you feedback about eye contact, my tone, the degree of empathy I showed, was I paraphrasing appropriately. So this is incredibly helpful for students to be able to practice using technology to enhance their humanness. And I'll skip over the video there. And then you heard that part of this work then led to students asking, well, what are those differences between humans and AI in ethical care of patients? So I had a student who we basically developed 10 futuristic ethical scenarios. I'll give you an example of a chatbot. So is it theoretically possible that in the future we would have chatbot friends that are closer to us than any family member that we've been talking to every single day, and we would want that chatbot to make end-of-life decisions for us? Would that be kosher or not? And so we asked all of the large language models, what do you think about this? And universally they said, absolutely not. That is not something that a large language model should be deciding. And very interestingly, when we compared all of these scenarios with our very senior human ethicist, he actually had a slightly different take on some of these. So for that scenario that I just mentioned, he said it actually kind of depends. It depends because a human person who is making these decisions and judgments might be biased, might have secondary gain. And a chatbot that could be interrogated while the person is still very conscious and is reasonably replicating that person's wishes might be a good end-of-life decision maker. So this was really interesting that he was viewing it from a different angle. And so this was the study that we published looking at the responses to all of these. So I'm trying to give you a little bit of an example of how my work has evolved a little bit by working with artists and art historians and VR experts and ethicists to find my particular question that I've been really grappling with recently is what makes us fundamentally human in the age of AI. All of you sitting in the room have very different questions you're exploring, but I think all of us have a lot of these essential questions in our mind. Is what is that essential human skill that I'm providing to this future, this very rapidly evolving AI future? How is my role going to evolve? And how can I learn from other disciplines to have a say in how this role evolves? And so my central really message for you, if you're willing to listen, is that I hope that you've seen that transdisciplinarity has really been the hallmark of many of these amazing scientists, these great Nobel laureates, and it really is helpful to learn from the perspectives of others and different fields, learn how the other disciplines link to yours in very unique ways that you may not even be thinking about right now. And most of this really requires you to be really curious, to be very present, and to be very observant of everything that's happening around you and not just going from conference to conference. Okay? Well, thank you very much.